We added the header in the last lecture. Now I want to work on my recipes. So we got the recipes component, which holds the recipe list. Now I also want to fill the list with some life. For this, I'll go into my recipe list component, and we will learn more about ng on init later in the next module, in the components module. For now, what I want to do here is I want to add my recipes array, my array of recipes, which for now is an empty array. And here, let's go back to that slide from the beginning. I want to define how a recipe should look like. We're going to use a recipe a lot throughout this app, and therefore we should definitely clearly define how a recipe looks like so that whenever we use it in any component, we're always talking about the same structure, about the same kind of object. So for this, I will create a model. What is a model then? A model simply is a TypeScript file. So in the recipes folder, because it's going to be the recipe model, I'll add another file. It's called recipe.model.ts. Now, .model is optional, but again, you should be descriptive about what's inside a file. And with that, it's pretty clear what will be inside. So I'll add this file. Again, it's now just in the recipes folder. And how should this file look like? First of all, I'm going to export a TS class, a TypeScript class, which is simply named recipe, because we define how a single recipe looks like here. Now you could think that we're going to add something like add model here. And we're not going to do this. There is no decorator like this. And we don't need to do this because we can use vanilla TypeScript for this. A model, in the end, should just be a blueprint for objects we create. And a TypeScript class does just this job. A class can be instantiated, so we can create new objects based on the setup we provide here in this class. So we can define how a recipe should look like in this class. So let's do this. A recipe should have a name. And I'll add an accessor to be really clear about that this is publicly available, so that this can be accessed from outside if using this as an instantiated object. So I'll add public in front of it, and then name as the property name. I'll also assign the type of this by adding a colon, and the type will be string. And that is just how you assign types in TypeScript. You add a colon after the property name, and then the type you want to assign. So string in this case. I also want to have a description in each recipe. So I'll add my description property, which also is a string, because a description is just a text, of course. Now, maybe we also want to store an image for each recipe. So we should have an image path, since we won't store the image itself here, of course. That wouldn't work. We can't store files in our code, but we want to store the path pointing to the image. And we will simply use images from the web here, so this will hold a URL in the end. So that is also a string, a text in the end. That is the basic model for now, the basic blueprint. I'll also add a constructor to it so that we can instantiate this with the new keyword and pass the arguments right to the constructor. So here I expect to receive the name, which will be of type string, the description, I'll just write it a bit shorter here, which will be of type string, and the image path, which will be of type string. In the constructor body, and if that's brand new to you, the constructor simply is a built-in function every class has, and which will be executed once you create a new instance of this class. I will show you how this works in a second. So inside of the body of this constructor, we have to assign the arguments we receive here to the properties of our object now, to the properties of our class. So this name, referring to the name up here, to our property, should be equal to name. And now the same for description. This description should be equal to desk. And this image path should be equal to image path. So with that, we got a recipe model we can use. Now let's use it in the next lecture.